Hi there, English learners, and welcome to today's video lesson. I'm genuinely excited to discuss a topic that many of us can relate to. Have you ever been in a situation where you can easily understand English, whether you're reading or listening, but when it comes to speaking, you suddenly freeze? You know the vocabulary, you comprehend what's being discussed, but when you attempt to speak, the words simply don't come out the way you want them to? If this sounds familiar, rest assured you're not alone. This is a common challenge that many English learners face. It can be discouraging, and sometimes you might even feel like you're not making any progress. But I want to assure you right now that understanding English is a significant achievement. It means you've already built a solid foundation. The next step is to convert that understanding into confident speaking. And the good news is that with the right approach, you can definitely accomplish this. In today's lesson, we'll explore why many learners understand English but struggle to speak it. I'll share some insights into why this happens and, most importantly, I'll provide some practical, straightforward tips to help you enhance your speaking abilities. Whether you're learning English for professional purposes, travel, or simply to improve your communication skills, this video is designed for you. By the end of this lesson, you'll feel more confident about speaking English, and you'll have a clear strategy to make progress every day. So if you've ever thought, I understand English but I can't speak it, keep watching as we discuss how to transform that frustration into action and take your speaking skills to the next level. Let me share a story about my friend Sarah, who experienced this exact challenge. Sarah was an outstanding student who had studied English for many years and had a deep understanding of grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. She could read English books, watch movies without subtitles, and understand everything being said. But when it came to speaking, well, that's when things got complicated. I remember the first time Sarah and I went to a cafe together. She was enthusiastic about practicing her English, so I suggested we order our coffee in English. She agreed, but when the moment arrived, she couldn't speak. She stood there looking at the barista, but her mouth went dry and the words wouldn't come out. She could hear the words in her mind, but couldn't articulate them. I noticed her frustration and asked, "What's happening? Why don't you just say it?" Sarah looked at me and replied, "I know what I want to say. I understand everything you're saying, but when it's my turn to speak, I get nervous. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake or that I won't sound good." This is a very common feeling among learners who have spent time studying English but haven't had much practice speaking. For Sarah, it wasn't that she didn't know how to speak. It was that she was afraid to make mistakes. She didn't want to sound incorrect or unpolished. Her fear of speaking was holding her back despite her excellent understanding of the language. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I've been in Sarah's position. Perhaps you've studied English for a long time and can understand everything, but when it's your turn to speak, you freeze. It can be incredibly frustrating. You want to express yourself clearly, but you worry about how you sound. Maybe you're even concerned about what others will think. I want to remind you that these feelings are completely normal. You're not alone in this. In fact, I've spoken with many learners who face the same issue, including some advanced students. They understand everything perfectly, but speaking feels like an insurmountable challenge. I've experienced this too, feeling like I could understand everything, but the moment I needed to say something, I felt stuck. For Sarah, It took time and a shift in mindset to overcome her fear. One thing that helped her was realizing that making mistakes is part of the learning process. Every time she made a mistake, she learned something new. She began practicing with me more, speaking in simple sentences even when she wasn't sure if they were perfect. Gradually, she became more confident. Over time, Sarah started speaking English more frequently. She joined a speaking club where learners gathered to practice. She began conversing with strangers in English, even when she wasn't certain if her grammar was correct. Her confidence grew, and she became increasingly proficient. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about practicing, making mistakes, and learning from them. Today, Sarah is one of the most confident English speakers I know. She travels worldwide, converses with people from all over, and has used English to build her career. Looking back, she says the most significant change she made was shifting her focus from perfection to simply speaking. The more she practiced, the more natural it became. She realized that speaking was about communication, not perfection. I share Sarah's story because it's not unusual to feel like you understand English but can't speak it. In fact, this is one of the most common challenges for English learners. But just like Sarah, you can overcome this challenge. It requires practice, patience, and a willingness to make mistakes. The more you practice, the more comfortable you'll become, and one day you'll find that speaking English becomes as effortless as understanding it. Why does this happen? If you're someone who understands English but struggles to speak it, you may be wondering why this is happening. It's a frustrating feeling because you've put in the effort. You've learned the vocabulary, understood the grammar, and can read and listen without much difficulty. Yet, when it's time to speak, the words seem to get stuck, or you can't express yourself the way you want to. The truth is, this is a very common experience for language learners, and it occurs for several important reasons. Let's explore some of the main factors why understanding English and speaking it don't always go hand in hand. 1. Lack of practice. One of the most significant reasons why many learners struggle to speak even if they understand English is simply insufficient practice. Speaking is a skill just like any other and needs to be practiced regularly to improve. When we don't practice speaking, it's easy to become nervous and lack confidence when we actually need to use the language in real-life situations. Most learners spend considerable time reading, listening, and studying grammar, which are all important skills, but they don't dedicate as much time to speaking. Speaking requires us to produce words quickly and respond in real time, unlike listening where you can take your time to understand. Speaking often requires us to think on the spot, which can feel overwhelming if we haven't had enough practice. The more we speak, the more comfortable and automatic it becomes. If you only practice speaking occasionally, you might find yourself freezing up when it's time to speak. But if you make speaking a daily habit, you'll find that it becomes easier and more natural over time. 2. Fear of making mistakes. Another reason many learners struggle to speak even though they understand English is the fear of making mistakes. This fear is often what prevents us from practicing. We might worry that we'll make a grammatical error, mispronounce a word, or say something incorrect that will embarrass us. But here's the reality. Making mistakes is part of the learning process. Every learner makes mistakes, and it's these mistakes that help us improve. When we attempt to speak and get things wrong, that's when we have the opportunity to learn and grow. Yet many learners feel embarrassed about making mistakes, which prevents them from speaking in the first place. This fear is completely natural. It's a feeling that most language learners experience, especially in the beginning stages. However, it's important to understand that no one expects you to speak perfectly. In fact, the more mistakes you make, the better you'll become at speaking. The key is to embrace mistakes and view them as valuable learning opportunities. Every time you speak, you'll improve, and eventually those mistakes will become less frequent. 3. Lack of confidence. Sometimes, even though we understand a language, we don't feel confident enough to speak it. Confidence plays a crucial role in communication. If we don't feel sure of ourselves, we're more likely to hesitate and avoid speaking. This lack of confidence often stems from self-doubt. We might worry about how we sound to others, or we might feel that our speaking skills aren't good enough compared to native speakers or other learners. This fear can prevent us from speaking, even though we have the knowledge and ability to do so. Building confidence in speaking takes time and practice, but one of the best ways to start building confidence is to change your mindset. Remember, you don't have to sound perfect. The goal is to communicate your ideas and connect with others. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become. It's all about taking small steps and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, one conversation at a time. 4. Speaking speed and fluency issues. Another reason why speaking might feel difficult is the issue of speaking speed and fluency. English learners often understand the language, but when they try to speak, they may struggle to find the right words or speak quickly enough. This can lead to hesitation and difficulty forming sentences. When you speak a language, it's not just about knowing the words or grammar rules. It's about being able to recall those words and combine them in real time. This requires practice and muscle memory. If you're not accustomed to speaking frequently, your brain might take longer to find the words, and this can make you feel stuck while speaking. For example, you might know the word apple, but when you need to talk about it, it takes a little longer for you to recall it. This is a common issue for learners who focus mainly on passive skills like listening and reading, but don't practice speaking regularly. Your speaking speed and fluency improve with practice, but it takes time to develop that mental connection between the words and your ability to speak them quickly. 5. Fear of communication. Breakdown. Finally, some learners may be afraid of not being able to communicate clearly. They worry that their listeners won't understand them because of their accent, mistakes, or incorrect sentence structure. This fear of communication breakdown can make us hesitate to speak or avoid situations where we have to use English. It's important to recognize that communication isn't just about speaking perfectly. It's about conveying your message. Even if you make mistakes or have a strong accent, as long as your listener understands you, the conversation is successful. Many English learners fear speaking because they focus too much on perfection. But in reality, most people will appreciate your effort to speak their language and will be understanding if you make mistakes. 6. Limited vocabulary recall. When we understand English but have trouble speaking, it could also be due to limited vocabulary recall. This means that even though you know many words, you can't always remember them when you need them in a conversation. This issue often arises when learners focus more on reading and listening and not enough on speaking practice, which involves active word recall. If you practice speaking regularly, your vocabulary will expand, and you'll find it easier to recall words quickly when you need them. This is why speaking regularly is so important. It forces you to use new vocabulary and improves your ability to remember and use words in context. As you can see, there are many reasons why you might understand English but have trouble speaking it. Whether it's lack of practice, fear of making mistakes, lack of confidence, issues with fluency, fear of communication breakdown, or limited vocabulary recall, all of these are common challenges for learners. But the good news is that these challenges aren't permanent. With the right approach, you can overcome them, and it all starts with understanding why this happens. Once we understand the reasons behind our struggles, we can begin to take action and find solutions. In the next section, we'll discuss why speaking practice is so important and how it can help you become more confident and fluent in English. The importance of speaking practice. Now that we've explored why many learners understand English but struggle to speak it, let's focus on one of the most important solutions: speaking practice. If you want to become fluent and confident in English, speaking is essential. But why is speaking practice so crucial? Why is it the most effective way to improve your speaking skills? 1. Speaking connects. Knowledge to action. When you're learning English, you may spend a lot of time studying grammar rules, vocabulary, and reading or listening to English. These activities are important for understanding the language, but understanding a language and actively using it are two different things. When we practice speaking, we connect what we've learned in our minds with real-life communication. It's like taking a test where you apply everything you've learned in practice. For example, you may know all the vocabulary for common foods, but when you enter a restaurant, you might hesitate to order in English because you haven't practiced speaking the words. By practicing regularly, you'll be able to recall vocabulary and grammar rules quickly when needed. Speaking helps bridge the gap between knowledge and action. The more you speak, the faster your brain becomes at recalling words, forming sentences, and thinking in English. It also makes your understanding of English more practical because it allows you to use the language in real-life situations, which helps make the language stick. 2. Speaking practice builds confidence. One of the biggest obstacles to speaking English is confidence. As we discussed earlier, learners often know the language but lack the confidence to speak. The more you practice, the more comfortable you will become. Confidence comes with practice. It's important to recognize that confidence doesn't happen overnight. It's built over time, and speaking practice is the best way to build it. When you speak regularly, you get used to hearing yourself speak, making mistakes, and receiving feedback. The more you practice, the more you'll realize that making mistakes is not something to be afraid of. It's a normal part of the learning process. With each mistake, you become more confident in your ability to speak and communicate in English. Think about it this way. If you never practice, you will always stay in your comfort zone. Speaking even just a few minutes daily will push you beyond that zone and gradually build your confidence. The more you expose yourself to real conversations and situations, the more naturally confident you'll become in speaking English. 3. Speaking helps you think in English. One of the most powerful outcomes of speaking practice is that it helps you to think in English. Most learners, especially beginners and intermediates, tend to think in their native language first, and then translate it into English. This can slow down your response time and make it harder to speak fluently. When you practice speaking regularly, you train your brain to think directly in English instead of translating word for word. You start to understand the structure of English better and form sentences in English faster. This is what fluent speakers do. They think in English, not in their native language. To reach this level, you need consistent speaking practice. You need to speak so often that it becomes second nature. The more you practice, the more your brain will automatically switch to thinking in English, which in turn will make you a faster and more natural speaker. 4. Speaking practice improves pronunciation and fluency. Pronunciation and fluency are two areas that can improve dramatically with consistent speaking practice. If you don't practice speaking, your pronunciation may suffer, even if you can read English well and understand it. Speaking requires a different set of skills, especially when it comes to producing the sounds and rhythms of the language. When you practice speaking, you give yourself the opportunity to focus on pronunciation. You'll hear yourself speak, and with practice, you can work on improving your accent, pronunciation of specific sounds, and the overall fluency of your speech. This doesn't happen merely by listening or reading. It requires you to actively speak and pay attention to how words sound. Fluency also improves with speaking practice. Fluency is about being able to express your thoughts clearly and quickly. When you practice speaking often, you'll notice that your ability to speak without hesitation improves. You'll begin to speak with more ease, and ideas will flow naturally. The more you practice, the less you'll pause to find words, and the more you'll sound like a native speaker. 5. Speaking practice builds your listening skills. It may seem like speaking and listening are two separate skills, but they're actually very closely related. In fact, practicing speaking can greatly improve your listening skills as well. When you speak English, you often have to listen carefully to your conversation partner in order to respond. This helps improve your listening comprehension. For example, if you're practicing English with a friend or teacher, you have to understand their response to continue the conversation. Through this back and forth exchange, you train your brain to listen more actively and catch details in conversations. Furthermore, when you practice speaking in real-life situations, you'll get used to the natural flow of conversations. You'll hear how native speakers use the language and adapt to it. This helps you improve your listening skills because you're exposed to authentic language use. Listening while speaking is like learning to ride a bike. You can't separate the two. They work together. 6. Speaking practice makes you a better communicator. At its core, language is about communication. When you practice speaking, you improve your ability to express your thoughts, ideas, and feelings. Communication is not just about speaking clearly. It's also about understanding the other person and responding appropriately. Speaking practice teaches you how to navigate conversations, express yourself with confidence, and understand how to interact in different situations. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about knowing I'll continue writing the text and provide a conclusion that follows the same style and approach as the original content. Speaking practice exposes you to real-life language use. When you practice speaking English in real-life situations, you're exposed to authentic language use that you might not encounter in textbooks or classroom settings. You'll learn colloquial expressions, slang, an informal language that native speakers use every day. This exposure helps you understand how English is actually used in different contexts and makes your own speech sound more natural and less formal. For example, if you practice speaking with native speakers, you'll notice that they often use contractions like don't instead of do not, idioms, and phrasal verbs that might not be taught in traditional language courses. By engaging in these conversations, you'll gradually incorporate these natural expressions into your own speech, making you sound more like a native speaker. Real-life speaking practice also helps you understand cultural nuances and social cues that are essential for effective communication. Language isn't just about words, it's about understanding cultural context and social norms. When you practice speaking in authentic situations, you learn these subtle aspects of communication that can't be taught in a textbook. Speaking practice helps you identify your weaknesses. Regular speaking practice allows you to identify your specific weaknesses in English. When you speak, you might notice that you struggle with certain sounds, tenses, or vocabulary areas. By recognizing these challenges, you can focus your learning on improving these specific areas. For instance, if you find that you consistently struggle with the piath sound or past tense verbs during speaking practice, you can dedicate extra time to practicing these areas. Without regular speaking practice, these weaknesses might remain hidden, and you might not know what you need to improve. Remember, awareness is the first step toward improvement. By speaking regularly and paying attention to your challenges, you can create a targeted learning plan that addresses your specific needs rather than studying everything at once. Practical tips to improve your English speaking skills. Now that we understand why speaking practice is so important, let's look at some practical tips to help you improve your English speaking skills, especially if you're someone who understands English but struggles to speak it. Create a daily speaking routine. Consistency is key when it comes to improving your speaking skills. Set aside at least 15 to 30 minutes each day dedicated to speaking English. This could be talking to yourself, practicing with a language partner, or even recording yourself speaking English. The important thing is to make it a habit. You might start by describing your day, expressing your opinions on current events, or explaining a concept you're familiar with. Over time, these daily practice sessions will significantly improve your fluency and confidence. Remember, even a little practice each day is better than hours of practice once a week. Find a language exchange partner. One of the best ways to practice speaking is to find a language exchange partner, someone who wants to learn your native language while you learn English. This creates a mutually beneficial relationship where both parties have something to gain. There are many websites and apps designed for language exchange, such as Tandem, HelloTalk, or Speaky. You can also look for language exchange meetups in your area. Having a regular conversation partner provides you with consistent practice and immediate feedback on your speaking skills. Join speaking clubs or online communities. Speaking clubs or online communities focused on English learning can provide you with opportunities to practice speaking in a supportive environment. These groups often organize regular meetings or online sessions where members can practice speaking English together. Many language schools and community centers offer English conversation clubs. You can also find online communities on platforms like Discord, Reddit, or social media groups dedicated to English learning. These communities often organize voice chats or video calls where you can practice speaking with other learners. Talk to yourself in English. This might sound strange, but talking to yourself in English is an excellent way to practice speaking, especially if you're shy or don't have access to conversation partners. You can describe what you're doing as you go about your day, express your thoughts or feelings, or practice explaining concepts out loud. For example, as you're cooking, you can describe the ingredients you're using and the steps you're taking. Or while watching a movie, you can summarize the plot or share your thoughts about the characters. This practice helps you think in English and improves your ability to express yourself spontaneously. Use voice recording apps. Recording yourself speaking English and then listening to the recordings can be incredibly helpful for improving your pronunciation and fluency. Record yourself speaking on various topics, then listen back and identify areas where you need improvement. Many language learning apps have features that allow you to record yourself speaking and compare your pronunciation to native speakers. This gives you immediate feedback on your pronunciation and helps you identify specific sounds or words that you need to practice more. Practice with tongue twisters and pronunciation exercises. Tongue twisters and pronunciation exercises are great for improving your speaking skills, especially if you struggle with certain sounds in English. Start with simple tongue twisters and gradually move on to more challenging ones. For example, you might practice saying, "She sells seashells by the seashore," or "red lorry, yellow lorry," to improve your pronunciation of specific sounds. These exercises not only help with pronunciation, but also train your mouth muscles to produce English sounds more naturally. Watch and imitate native speakers. Watching videos of native English speakers and imitating their speech patterns can be an effective way to improve your speaking skills. Choose videos on topics that interest you, watch them with subtitles, and then try to repeat what the speakers say, mimicking their intonation and rhythm. YouTube channels, podcasts, and TV shows are great resources for this practice. Focus on short segments at first, and gradually work your way up to longer passages. This shadowing technique helps you develop a more natural-sounding accent and rhythm in your speech. Start with simple conversations. If you're nervous about speaking English, start with simple conversations on familiar topics. Talk about your hobbies, your daily routine, or your favorite movies. As you become more comfortable, gradually move on to more complex topics and conversations. Remember, it's okay to use simple language at first. The goal is to build confidence and fluency. As you practice more, you'll naturally incorporate more complex vocabulary and grammar structures into your speech. Embrace mistakes as learning opportunities. As we discussed earlier, fear of making mistakes is one of the biggest obstacles to speaking English. Instead of avoiding mistakes, embrace them as valuable learning opportunities. Every time you make a mistake and correct it, you're less likely to make the same mistake again. Ask your conversation partners or teachers to correct your mistakes, and don't be discouraged when they do. Keep a notebook of common mistakes and review them regularly to avoid repeating them. Remember, even native speakers make mistakes, so perfection shouldn't be your goal. Effective communication should be. Immerse yourself in English whenever possible. Create an English-rich environment around you. Change your phone's language to English. Watch movies and TV shows in English, listen to English music, and read English books or articles. The more you surround yourself with English, the more natural it will feel to speak it. This immersion helps you think in English rather than translating from your native language, which is crucial for speaking fluently. It also exposes you to different accents, expressions, and vocabulary that you might not encounter in formal language learning. Conclusion: understanding English but struggling to speak it is a common challenge for many language learners. As we've discussed, this happens for various reasons, including lack of practice, fear of making mistakes, lack of confidence, and issues with fluency and vocabulary recall. However, with the right approach and consistent practice, you can overcome these challenges and become a confident English speaker. Remember Sarah's story? She went from being afraid to speak English to becoming a confident speaker who uses English in her daily life and career. Her journey wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about practicing consistently, embracing mistakes as learning opportunities, and gradually building confidence through real-life conversations. The key to improving your English speaking skills is regular, deliberate practice. Create a daily speaking routine. Find language exchange partners, join speaking clubs, and immerse yourself in English whenever possible. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're an essential part of the learning process and provide valuable feedback for improvement. Most importantly, be patient with yourself. Learning to speak a language fluently takes time and consistent effort. Celebrate your progress, no matter how small, and keep pushing yourself to speak more often and in more challenging situations. With time and practice, you'll find that speaking English becomes as natural and comfortable as understanding it. So if you're someone who understands English but struggles to speak it, remember that you're not alone, and you can overcome this challenge. Take that first step today. Speak English, even if it's just for a few minutes. Every word you speak brings you one step closer to fluency and confidence. Your journey to becoming a confident English speaker starts now, and I'm excited for you to experience the joy and satisfaction of expressing yourself fluently in English.